let's talk about Joe Rossi. Who is Joe Rossi? For those who don't know, Joe Rossi is the defensive coordinator at Michigan State now. And where was he at before, CD?
He was at the University of Minnesota, the Golden Gophers, my Golden Gophers. And let me tell you, man, Joe Rossi is an unbelievable defense coordinator. He is the best kept secret in college football. In my opinion, he was the guy that PJ Fleck, because of his tight relationship, was able to keep him there for so long. Notre Dame came a knocking. Other schools, Michigan looked into him at times. Like it was Joe Rossi was a hot commodity. All right, all throughout college football. Maybe in the shadows more so than in thrust into the light. But what he did when he took over in 2019 is he changed the course of PJ Fleck's tenure at Minnesota.
Yeah, and I do like to highlight like good coaches, right? And I will play a little bit of devil's advocate a little bit later, and I'm going to have you defend Joe Rossi because there are going to be people that are questioning this hire as well. I'm going to give you a chance to defend those comments, right? When he had really good talent on this team, on his teams, he found ways to utilize them to the best of their abilities, right? And he also did a really good job developing as well. Now, is there like a gigantic influx of NFL talent at Minnesota as there are some of these other schools? No, but these guys are getting developed and they're going to the league as these three stars coming in, right? Like Joe Rossi did a really good job for several years at Minnesota. Before that, he was at Rutgers, if you remember, in 2014, 2015. I mean, it was Rutgers. You know, they had a good season with him there, I guess. They went like 8-5, but I don't know that his defenses were necessarily spectacular. And I think that's where some of the skepticism comes in, right? Because you go to a school like Minnesota and you like in 2019, right, was probably like their best team in, I mean, how many, 40 years plus. You look at this, that defensive team, that defense had a lot of talent on it, but they also gave up some points, you know? And part of that was the pace of the offense was a little bit different because they could throw the ball pretty effectively with Tyler Johnson and Rashad Bateman there at wide receiver. Does it concern you at all that, you know, Joe Rossi has been coaching a defense for a team that is very adept to running the ball a lot and effectively, thus slowing down the game and giving your team time to rest, you know, limiting the number of possessions for the other team? Like, does that, do you think that that should play a factor in anyone's thoughts on Joe Rossi? And I'll give you a chance to talk about that.
Well, yeah, I'll give you a couple other factors too in terms of pleading and making your case. There is that not only did they play in the Big Ten West, right, where it was not elite high flying offenses anywhere, right, throughout his tenure at Minnesota, but also the way the conservative nature, not only the offensive play calling, but the head coach decision making on third and fourth down was we're not going to turn the ball over. And if it's fourth and three on the 40-yard line, the opponent's 40-yard line, we're going to punt the ball and they're going to pin them deep and obviously give your defense nice cushion and ability to, really have the whole field and the bend but don't break. Obviously, what Joe Rossi did very well at Minnesota. I think a lot of it, what I'll say in defense of Joe Rossi, a lot of it is your scheme fit. It's like what kind of players you have, your offense is, complementary football is a very important thing, something that Joe Rossi understands. And he did a really good job with PJ Fleck. Now, you did see at times where 2020, which I wouldn't even count, by the way, because Minnesota's, it was a mess, right? Not only everywhere in college football, but the COVID outbreaks, how young the team was, it did not look good. They could not tackle because they didn't practice tackling. It was a lot going on there at Minnesota for Joe Rossi. Yeah, I mean, those are valid concerns, and we'll see how they get addressed in this upcoming new Big Ten. And obviously with Michigan State, who I would say, by the way, in this year 2024, might have less talent than Minnesota might have this year or he's had in years past. Obviously, you lose guys like Simeon Barrow, Derek Harmon in this latest transfer portal, two Big Ten losses going to Miami and Oregon, respectively. But yeah, I do think long term wise, I think Joe Ross is a fantastic hire. You're going to be able to bring in talent there for him with John Smith, the money they have at NIL, being in the Big Ten, all these things going for you at Michigan State. You've seen what they've done in the transfer portal at times this year, and I think it's only going to get better and better as Jonathan Smith gets there and gets acclimated to East Lansing. And I think once Joe Rossi does have that talent, he's a guy, like you said, can really take advantage of it, put guys in great spots, maximize these players that maybe, other coaches wouldn't get the best out of. I mean, you saw it. It was night and day. You go back to 2019, 2018, it was night and day compared when Minnesota and Joe Rossi took over. for the Minnesota Golden Gophers.
So let me ask you this as well. Michigan State, even in the Mel Tucker era, right, had a very tough time in their secondary. Okay. They adding a couple transfers in here. Like, is this something that you think Joe Rossi is going to immediately help improve, or do you think that this is going to take a couple years and requires a heck of a lot of talent acquisition?
Both. I would say both. I think what they did at Minnesota is they've had a pretty good secondary for a while now. You've seen a lot of good draft picks. I mean, Antoine Winfield, highest played DB in the history of the NFL. I mean, he was from Minnesota, Joe Rossi guy. Tyler Nubin got drafted this year. Terrell Howden a year ago. Terrell Smith as well. Or sorry, Jordan Howden. Terrell Howden, somebody else. Jordan Howden and Terrell Smith, both guys that drafted just a year ago. Yeah, there's a lot of talent that Minnesota's actually had underratedly in the secondary. I think part of it is the scheme fits. What Joe Rossi does is playing that, it's kind of like a 4-2-5 type thing. But also like not putting your secondary in vulnerable spots. They do a good job on first and second down to create opportunistic plays on third down, or where they don't have to blitz a ton of guys up front to where you're putting in your secondary in vulnerable spots. I think the talent and the coaching, two weak spots, two liabilities in the secondary for Michigan State, even though surprising that Mel Tucker would have that. But a couple years now, it was valid. It was really a concern, and I think I don't know about overnight. We'll see how it goes in year one. Obviously, Michigan State's got a lot of holes to fix. They get a nice transfer over from Arizona State at the end of this spring transfer cycle to play corner for them. But we'll see what happens. But I do think, like, in terms of changing the culture, what you're trying to do at Michigan State, you're trying to create physical players. You're trying to create a physical brand of football that Jonathan Smith's bringing over from, right, Corvallis over to the Big Ten. Joe Ross is a guy that understands the landscape of the Big Ten, like you mentioned, Rutgers and Minnesota, but also like building a culture, building a program. Yeah, I think all those things. Not going to see in year one, maybe not. And so don't write him off too early. Just as I would urge you not to write off Jonathan Smith too early. It's going to take some time there potentially. I have some patience with it. I do think this is a really nice hire. Minnesota fans were devastated, absolutely devastated. They know how lucky they've been to have Joe Rossi for that long. And the other Big Ten guys, you understand, like they're oh, this is a nice hire, a nice hire for Michigan State.
This isn't like the Kirk Shiraka hire though, right? For Rutgers. It's not like that's not these are not equivalent, right?
No,
These are not equivalent.
no, but I do think like you might see some struggles, just like Kirk Straka had with Rutgers. We'll see how he does this year, reunited back with Ethan.
I mean,
But
Kirk
this is
Shiraga doesn't need help struggling. All right, that's
no.
that's one thing. So, but anyways, let me ask you this. So Joe Rossi had mentioned that Minnesota had been lucky to hold on to him for so long. Like, what other schools were interested in Joe Rossi these past couple years?
I mean, I don't know if he never ever got a job offer from Notre Dame, but I do know that was one that Minnesota schools were terrified. If that were the case, I know Wisconsin's obviously opened up. Um, I don't know if he was ever really in the consideration there with Fickle bringing over, I believe, another Fickle. Notre Dame was the one that a lot of people were scared about. And that one, I think there was some fire there. I don't know if there was actual, a job offer, but I know that's something that Ross would be interested in, and that the fit seemed right there as well. But he's interesting. He's not a guy that really gets brought up for head coaching jobs much. I mean, Kenny Burns is a guy that went from the running back coach at Minnesota to the head coach at Kent State. And obviously, being in the MAC, Kent State's a different level of program than Michigan State or another Big Ten program. But yeah, I think a little bit surprising. I think a lot of Minnesota fans thought they survived the wave, and then obviously, December 14th hit, and Joe Rossi was named the head defensive coordinator and linebacker coach for Michigan State, and so obviously a little bit surprising. But yeah, once it kind of happened, it makes a lot of sense. Though it makes a lot. He's getting a pay raise, and also like part of it was resetting the clock too. With PJ Fleck just came off a 5-7 year. Minnesota, they're not going to fire him by any means at all. But I do think that like they're going to have patience with Jonathan Smith. Maybe not quite the patience that PJ Fleck's going to get at Minnesota if things start to continue to turn, not in the best direction for that program.